Assassin's Creed Origins is a game that on release seemed to be universally beloved by almost the entire AC community. However, over the years, and rightfully so, its reputation has continually seen a decline. The soft reboot of the series back in 2017 was initially seen as a breath of fresh air, a well-needed change for the franchise that would align it with modern gaming standards. However, it saw the series name be twisted and tarnished in the name of evolution, as we've seen with its successors Odyssey and Valhalla. Although the many issues with Origins have been made clearer over the years though, it still stands in most people's rankings as one of the better games in the franchise. So today I'm going to look at what AC Origins does great, what it does terribly, and again ask what really matters more. Of course, the most commonly attributed factor of what made Origins one of the fan favourite releases in 2017 was its protagonist, Bayek of Siwa. A man who was pledged to be akin to Altair in his presentation, in the sense that he'd already be a weathered and veteran warrior when we meet him. But in contrast to the largely stoic character of Altair, we saw Bayek have far more of a comedic edge to his character. Being one of the more layered protagonists we've seen in the franchise, Bayek shows the mental and emotional scars of his violent life, but still maintains an optimistic view of life and love for his people that shines through in nearly all his encounters. Bayek holds his values and his principles above all else, but refuses to look down upon those who don't necessarily share them. The contrast of the wise, caring father and the vicious, vengeful warrior is a fascinating one that hadn't been seen in the series prior, and it's put on display excellently by the astounding performance of Abu Bakr Salim, who truly does carry Origins to any and all heights it may have. However, despite its protagonist standing as fantastic, even Bayek is let down by Origins' story, which I initially called mediocre, but would now go as far to say is abysmal. After getting a development team filled with some of the most proven developers in the Assassin's Creed franchise, initial plans would see legendary writer Darby McDevitt work on Ubisoft's new Egyptian project. However, after those plans fell through, McDevitt would be replaced by a writer who had only a couple of independent Canadian comedies to his name. Unsurprisingly, this decision led to a narrative that seemed unsure of itself, something abundantly clear from the strangely paced opening that saw flashbacks and overlapping timelines that not only made no sense in the context of the Animus, but made no effort to create an interesting mystery. From there, we saw a revenge story told in a fairly by-the-numbers fashion, with some mind-bogglingly terrible dialogue thrown in there for good measure, until finally, we were presented with a grand reveal of the true main villain of the game. A man we meet once, is barely mentioned, and for many players was completely forgotten about by the time the reveal comes. As well as that, Aya 2 acts as a disappointingly underdeveloped character, with countless character traits, flaws and potential arcs being built for her, only to not go anywhere and for her to be pushed to the side. Other side characters that Origins present again are left underdeveloped, usually shoved away in uninteresting side quests and appearing later on in vital moments regardless of whether the player has actually met them or not. With such a great protagonist, Origins could have been improved exponentially by a cast of three-dimensional side characters that build on Bayek's journey, akin to the family Ezio built in Assassin's Creed 2. But alas, Bayek is left largely on his own as he pursues a wildly uninteresting set of targets that are built on flimsy motivations and dull external influences. Thankfully though, this subpar story took place in one of the most stunning and expansive worlds in the entire franchise. The recreation of the entirety of Egypt was a tall task that left people with high expectations, but those expectations were more than lived up to. Not only is the world expansive in scale, but in detail, with the historical accuracy of Egypt almost matching the sheer beauty of it. To turn off the compass and simply wander the streets of Alexandria and Memphis, or ride through the dunes of Giza and Siwa, allow for countless pieces of writings, tombs, people and tasks that build the atmosphere of the world, making it feel truly lived in. Although the array of bandit camps becomes exhaustive quickly, it can easily be avoided in exchange for simple admiration of the beauty of the world. The detail of this world is highlighted even further by the addition of the Discovery Tour, a brilliant encouragement for the player to engage in the history of Egypt. One of the more interesting and at times forgotten aspects of Assassin's Creed is the attention to historical detail it's always had, and this natural evolution of the original database system really turns this historical setting into a playground. However, this playground has its restrictions, most of which are put in place by the introduction of RPG elements into the Assassin's Creed franchise. The first of these is the supposed new and improved equipment system, which strays far from the systems we'd seen in the past games. Whereas the likes of the Ezio trilogy had a small selection of detailed and memorable weapons, Origins has an endless array of seemingly identical ones, split into 5 distinct groupings that each provide largely superficial differences in play. What was advertised as a more in-depth equipment system akin to The Witcher 3 devolves into a shallow, mind-numbing mechanic which effectively only impacts the damage of your attacks and little else. The biggest failure of this new mechanic, however, comes with one of, if not the most iconic and important aspect of the franchise, the hidden blade. The idea of being a blade in the crowd, an idea essential to the experience of AC, is only possible when that blade is lethal, but Origins makes the bizarre decision to make the hidden blade an upgradable weapon that wasn't a one-hit kill on enemies. This puts the player down one of two paths: either spend tens of hours at the beginning of the game acquiring items to max out your hidden blade, or spend the entire entire game forced to get into open conflict instead of using the stealth system in nearly all scenarios. That being said, given your hidden blade is sufficiently upgraded, the stealth system itself is easily one of the best in the series. Despite a priority clearly being put on the combat of Origins, its stealth was by no means ignored, filled with variety and open encounters. The vast array of tools Bayek can acquire, such as sleep darts, poison, firebombs, and smoke bombs, provide endless ways that the player can manipulate guards and empty an area of opposition without being seen. The ability to whistle makes a return, as do the iconic hiding spot and environmental stealth of the series, although heartbreakingly, Origins, thanks to the makeup of its environment, essentially removes any semblance of social stealth. Regardless of that disappointing removal, the rest of the stealth system is made up of consistent and interesting mechanics and settings that allow the player to vary their playstyle. Although the player can make the choice to play a more incognito style, it's still a pretty huge challenge to truly get the assassin fantasy from Origins, which is notoriously the worst change made to both this game and the series as a whole. There seemed to be an idea around 2016 that general audiences no longer found the base concept of Assassin's Creed fun, that is, to be an assassin, and so a huge amount of AC iconography and plot points were put to the wayside. Although it retains far more early elements of the franchise than, say, Odyssey or Valhalla, Origins still misses the mark all too often in that undeniably unique experience of playing an AC game. The parkour is downgraded to a ridiculous extent, to the point where it can barely be called a parkour system. The combat takes priority over stealth and is often a tedium of attacking damage sponges for minutes on end. And the origin story it tells of the Creed and the Brotherhood is half-baked at best, with the hidden ones being formulated in a sudden cutscene in the final hour or so of the main story without much profound motivation or reason. That being said, the hidden ones are massively expanded on in the Hidden Ones DLC, one of the two great additions to Origins that build on the world and Bayek as a character. The Hidden Ones DLC is a relatively short but engaging and interesting piece of content that sees the Brotherhood grow and evolve 4 years after the events of the main game. As Bayek goes through the Sinai helping it escape tyranny, he recruits new members to the Brotherhood, hunts targets and interesting set pieces, and fully embraces the leadership role he embodies. Meanwhile, the Curse of the Pharaohs DLC, despite being a more mystical and fantastical story, maintains a relatively grounded atmosphere as a piece of Hedon sends Bayek down an exploration of his own faith, a fascinating concept for a character as dedicated to his faith and culture as Bayek is. Both the DLCs act as fantastic expansions on the game, bringing two vitally different experiences to the player that separate themselves from each other and from the main game. That being said, nothing in Origins is able to quite cover the most pervasive and persistent issue it has: its introduction of modern Assassin's Creed's ridiculously unbalanced leveling systems. This newly introduced leveling mechanic acts as little more than an arbitrary excuse to push the player to buy microtransactions, as the levels themselves do little more than increase your capability for attack damage and reduce enemies' health, and the sheer grind required to increase levels becomes unbearable at certain points. Unless you choose to do every single side mission and optional activity in the game, you will always be underleveled, thus making you unable to progress in the story. This essentially converts any optional side content in the game into necessary content for the main story, which becomes a problem when the side missions devolve into tedious, boring copy and paste fetch quests and bandit camps. Thankfully, the skill tree itself actually provides tangible abilities and upgrades, as opposed to, say, Valhalla's tree, but regardless of that fact, the entire system destroys the flow and pacing of the main game, and once again leaves the player with a dichotomy. Either grind through 10 hours of tedious filler content, or buy time-saving microtransactions in order to experience the main narrative of the game. This mechanic, although not quite as pervasive on first playthrough, makes any replay of Origins absolutely impossible without the use of New Game Plus, and if an Assassin's Creed game has no replayability, it's clear that something's went majorly wrong. But of course, as always, that is just my opinion, so make sure to let me know yours in the comment down below. Is there anything I missed about Origins that you wish I had talked about? Let me know. Also, if you did enjoy the video, make sure to hit like, and if you're new here and want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe with post notifications turned on. If you'd like to support the channel, my Patreon link is in the description. And with that being said, I've been Joe, aka Scarab, and I will see you in the next one.